main stage. Before we get going, in case you haven't sat through one of these sessions before, we're using Pigeonhole to ask questions. So in a second, you'll see a QR code pop up. Please do scan the QR code and you'll be able to ask questions. Either put your name to them or you can ask them anonymously or you can upvote them as well. We're also offering simultaneous translation. It is the end of the day, apologies for that. Simultaneous translation via other headsets at the back of the room. So if you'd like to enjoy this session in a different language, there are options there. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to my host, Tim Groot, who is the CEO of GRIP, for the session, How to Give Participants What They Really Want, Meetings. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. So yeah, we're going to talk about meetings today, and we're going to talk about how meetings are having such a big impact on your event and how to make sure you're setting meetings up for success as part of that event experience. But I'm going to do that with two amazing panelists. So we've got Carolyn Dawson here, who is the CEO of Founders Forum Group, which also runs Tech Nation, which is very influential for UK tech, and previously was the president of Informa Tech. So it's got lots of experience with organizing tremendous events like London Tech Week and all sorts of other big trade shows and conferences across the world that have meetings as a core part of it. Thank you for joining. And then Richard Barnes, who is the CEO of Worldwide Events. They do events called M&I Forums, Private Luxury, and several others. They've been doing that since 2004. And they've organized more than 200 of them and have established over 750,000 meetings at those events. So hope that every one of them was influential and meaningful for the people that were there. First question, Richard, for you. So events, I was speaking to somebody that said, pre-COVID, I believe that events were about data. But now after the pandemic, I believe events are about relationships. Do you agree? Are events about relationships?
Tim, can you just repeat the first bit? Pre-pandemic about data?
Pre-pandemic events were about data, and now they're about relationships. Do you agree?
Events?
Yes.
Yes, hello everybody. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think for us, events have always been about relationships. We started in 2004, as you said, and we set out with a mission to try to create events that would give people good business relationships. So we really focused on that right from the outset. So yeah, I'd fully agree. I think it's more the case now than ever. And what data does is allow us to find ways to give people better relationships and more meaningful connections and to tailor those a bit. But for us, we judge our events entirely on how good the relationships are between the participants.
That's amazing. And so, Carolyn, I think that you mentioned to me previously how important data was in order to kind of create those relationships and meetings. Like, how do you look at how that has evolved and how you would go about creating that exhibitor ROI as part of meetings now?
Yeah, so I think my technology or my events experience has always been in technology, which meant that our customers were pretty tough cookies when it came to the technology we deployed or how we thought about our audiences and the innovation that we deployed in our events. But I think this sort of happened for us, I would say 8-9 years ago, where suddenly the ROI that the exhibitors demanded became a lot more sophisticated. It wasn't enough to just put in the investment to be here and be at the stands, but they actually wanted to see a real return of how many meetings they'd done and how many deals that were done from that. And that became quite a proof point in the sense of, okay, that's a direct correlation to the investment that was made to their events as the events market got more congested, I would say. But we really focused on a lot of the granular data about why people were coming to events, who they were, potentially when their buying cycle, when they were planning to actually make a purchase over a time period, so that we could give a lot more granularity to the exhibitors about not only who was coming, but when they might buy, what they were looking to buy, what sectors they were interested in. Now, we were using this mostly just off Excel, our registration data. Now, I think with tools like AI, this becomes not only, day-to-day, it starts to become a real necessity, and it's an amazing tool for us to be able to deploy as event organizers to really see that proper return on investment for clients.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like for the people in the audience, like how you're, maybe a show of hands of who is doing any form of pre-scheduled meetings hosted by or meeting programs at their event today. Show of hands, who's doing them right now at their shows? So we've got a couple of people that are doing them. Who is thinking about introducing meeting programs or hosted by or pre-scheduled meetings at their events? Yeah, quite a couple of people that are thinking about introducing them. That's really good. So like how, Richard, if you were kind of starting out with thinking about introducing a meeting program or hosted by or like we've got here at ETL, and you had to start from scratch and add that to an existing show, how would you go about that?
I think the first thing to do is to try and understand your audience well and understand the buyers and sellers that you're bringing to an event, and try to make a judgment about how what the natural level of meeting motivation is between the two groups. We're very lucky in that we run events in the travel sector, and the buyers and the sellers really have a mutual need to meet. So for us, doing the pre-scheduled meetings is easy. I think where it's difficult is when you're running events for audiences where typically the buyers are less inclined to be sold to by the exhibitors, so you're bringing the buyers to the event with another motivation such as content through the event, then the buyers might have a bit of resistance to the meeting side of it. So I think understanding that is the first part. Once you've committed and you think, yes, I have got buyers and sellers who are going to have a mutual interest in meeting, then if you do the pre-scheduled meetings, you've got to make sure that they're delivered upon. So you've got to make sure that people are turning up to their meetings and that you have a very low no-show rate, because otherwise you'll really frustrate the suppliers. So I think there's quite a lot of things that you can then do to ensure that.
The high risk, high reward, I think is the short kind of thing of that. Meetings, like if you get them right, it's very valuable, but I think when you got a large number of no-shows or irrelevant meetings, it can quickly kind of sour the relationship. How did you manage that when you kind of add them to bigger shows that already exist?
So this was something we actually introduced in Informa Tech about, I want to say 12 years or so ago, and frankly it's also because the technology industry and exhibitions had started to get very vast audiences, but again trying to prove the quality. It's something we implemented, which was one-to-one services, which frankly 12 years ago we just did manually, but it enabled us to really game change our pricing. So we were able to take traditional just square meterage pricing and turn it into much, much higher value ticket pricing and really draw a lot of sponsorship revenues off the back of those meetings. So it was a game changer in the sense of revenue, return, quality from our events, and so it's something we heavily invested in. And I think, obviously, to Richard's point, you have to set the expectations correctly, and actually it can really backfire on you if you do not set the expectation with the sponsors or the clients about how many meetings can be delivered. I've operated these traditionally in markets that don't want to meet each other, and there's an element of really having to do a little bit of hand-holding to it, but give an incentive to the buyers as well to be there. But we would manually set up those meetings. We would set up in a very nice space. We were able to charge premium, but we always had to plan for plan B, which is a lot of our events were free to attend. You couldn't guarantee that they would always turn up, even if they were VIPs. So you always had to have a set criteria of a few more that you could go out and get. We furnished that. We created an entire new function in our events team. It wasn't just marketing, content, sales, and operations. We had a VIP service team that literally just managed these meetings, but they were worth their weight in gold, and that became a game-changing function for us because what we saw was that our rebook rates rocketed from sort of 50, 60% to nearly 80% because we could prove the amount of meetings and the ROI the client had during the event. And so that really, it was transformational, and it was an investment and a role and a function that I would say time and time again we'd invest in. Now, luckily now, we can use technologies to deploy a lot of that and really take the admin out of it, which really means we've turned those teams, rather than say, let's cut that team, we've just turned them more into white glove service types. And really, the clients just absolutely love that, and it really makes your events very sticky.
Yeah, I'd add to that, we've done exactly the same thing, which it's the core of our event. So we started with that, so sort of a meeting concierge team who are working with the delegates right from the point of sign-up to get the right preferences from them, to get all the pre-event selections about who they want to meet, working with them to send them their schedules in advance, to work back and to do it, and all these things that really improve the quality of the meeting. And then on site again, we have a team who are doing the meetings management to ensure that all the meetings are running like clockwork. Everything designed to minimise that no-show rate and maximise the return for principally for the sellers, but in our market, the buyers get value from that too.
Yeah, it's quite. I went to a worldwide events event in 2020, actually, right before the pandemic, and it was so fascinating. It was like 150 tables, and all the suppliers were sitting at their table, and then there was a kind of control center where your team, and then there was like 2 or 3 people that were responsible for each row of tables, and then they were kind of like using walkie-talkies to be like, "Hey, there is somebody that's not here for the meeting. Find them." And then they were like, "They weren't on the bus this morning. They're still in bed." Like, like so.
They're in the loo. They're in the loo. Give them a minute. They'll be fine.
Yeah. So it's like it was really incredible to experience, and I think that like we work with a lot of organizers that want to introduce meeting programs at their events, right? Like they might already do a show, they're thinking of a new show or a spin-off or something, and it's like, well, where do you start? And most think of starting with the exhibitor because they think, oh, let's go and ask our biggest exhibitors if they want some meetings. And of course they go, yes. But what you end up with is a range of exhibitors that all have, or like really like your suppliers, that all have very different expectations, very different needs, and very different types of people that they might want to meet with. Like the really powerful thing, I think, is what is being said here is like, start with your buyers and try and find a group of, maybe it's only 20 or 30 of them that really know what they want and ideally want something similar. So if you can start with a small group that all want something similar of what they would want to have a meeting about, then that becomes really easy because then you can go to maybe not even the biggest exhibitors, maybe the medium-sized one and say, hey, actually, I can get you 10 meetings with people that really want to learn more about your product or service. And that is a much more easy way to do it because then you don't have the problem with no-shows because you know that these buyers really want to have that meeting. It becomes a much more seamless experience and you don't have to really kind of force it upon people, and it becomes much easier to introduce. And then the way that we see it being done is, well, rather than one way to do it is kind of in a dedicated area on the show days. And we were talking to our team earlier that is here. It's like, it's a bit tricky when it's like at the show floor throughout the entire day. A nicer way to do it, if I were to introduce it, is do it maybe the day before and have a lovely lunch and then just, have a dedicated space where maybe you do for 2 or 3 hours, you make a really nice experience out of it. Or like that's what we do with PCMA, for example. In January, we did that in the US, and we do that for their shows. But also, like if you were to do it, you don't have that ability, do it in the morning, right? Like say, okay, if you are a buyer that's part of this program, you start at 8 a.m., you've got a lovely lunch for an hour, and then you do maybe 2 hours of meetings. And you could do that for 2 different streams. One day you do focused on sustainability, and the other day you do it focused on event tech. And those are ways that you can really make it so that every supplier sits there and is like, wow, I had a great start of the day. And that really changes that experience. I'm really curious, kind of like when you're talking about scaling that, you're talking about sponsorship, right? Like that's how do you add that on to a package for an exhibitor? How do you start that conversation?
For us, actually, crudely, what we looked at it was what might be an average deal size for each of our sponsors. And if they were able to meet 50 clients and do one deal, what was that value to them? And then work back as a slight percentage of that, which is effectively no more than I'd pay the commission to the sales team. So we sort of looked at it along those points, but we probably increased our average fee by about 25% off the back of those meetings. And we would scale it, which we did actually go into the business of guaranteed meetings. And we would scale them from sort of 10 to 50 meetings, depending on the size of show and other aspects. But we would also, I think, talking about formats, we wouldn't only just do the sort of one-to-one sessions. We would also do sort of sector-hosted hours. So we might do over drinks an hour for a certain sector or a different group. And we actually also did a sort of speed networking bit, which sounds horrific, but was actually hugely popular and still is today, which is just literally lining 15 buy-side, 15 sell-side, 2 minutes each, and they work around that. That actually gets around the problem of worried about whether people show up or not, because we would also basically plan to have double the amount of buy side to sell side. Again, in a market that was tougher, that didn't necessarily always want to meet. that would always net a return and was just good fun and actually a high energy visibility moment of your event. You know, most of the team would find it absolutely horrific, but at the end would feel really euphoric about the fact that generally we always manage to pull it off. But I think the sort of by sector can be a less scary approach for people wanting to do it as an introduction and not quite sure whether their markets are up for this or not. So, you know, in our Founders Forum events, we do a Meet the CEO session and Meet the VC session, so we'll just do it quite informally. But again, you know, there's a little bit of curation to it, but they're always the most high-value parts of the event. I think the other market that can often be is thinking about your first-time attendees. So we're getting so much more smarter about the data to our events now, but actually really catering to the first time someone has come to your event and thinking about hand-holding them and curating that experience a little bit more. They're more likely to want meetings because, frankly, they might be nervous about how to operate and navigate an event for the first time. So they can be your first willing customers, maybe.
Yeah, so many interesting points there. I think like one of the things was really interesting at Founders Forum is that you saw that a lot of investors you would expect to want to meet startups, but actually investors really want to meet other investors, which we saw in the data. And so, you know, you can do a dedicated space for investors to meet each other. So like looking at that data and which people want to meet each other can often be very interesting. Talking about formats and like all sorts of different things. Events on trains, you've done all sorts of incredible formats. I'd love to maybe share like what are the things that work and don't work from a formats and from a kind of relationship point of view.
Yeah, try not to do them on trains is the thing that doesn't work. Yeah, we've done lots of different formats. The backbone of our events has always been that we are selling schedules of guaranteed meetings. So we've done that from the outset. That's what the sellers, the travel sellers buy for us. We hold the events in different locations all the time, and we once did one in San Moritz, and so there was quite a long train journey to get there. So we used that time for everybody to do one-to-one meetings on the trains. And we had it all planned out. The train was going to come. It was a special train for us with 3 carriages, and so people would spend so much time on each carriage. And then move on to another carriage when they get to a stop, and this was all worked out. And then the train turned up with 2 carriages, and it was absolute chaos. And the pre-scheduled meetings went out of the window, but luckily the scenery was good, so everybody tuned into that instead. The stuff that works. I mean, Carolyn made a point, or Tim, you made a point as well, about not having distraction around, not having other agenda items that are on. We did this once at one of our events where, in fact, the one you came to in Dubai, which was great, Tea Fest, and it was the idea of festivalization, and everybody could create their own experience at the event and fill it with various different bits of content and meetings and so on. And we delivered to everybody their 40 scheduled meetings that they were supposed to get. But we also had these free-flow meeting sessions. But the free-flow meetings were happening at the same time as lots of other bits of content and some yoga sessions and you know, various different things that were both personal and professional. And so we found lots of people had scheduled meetings, but then there was a high no-show rate. And afterwards we got slammed by people who said they'd wasted their time sitting. Admittedly, they were sitting on a beach drinking pina colada while they were waiting for their meetings, but they were still pretty fed up. So I think it's, you know, back to this point, you've got to be sure that you're going to be able to deliver and that people are going to turn up, and then it works.
Also tried group schedule, like the group meetings as part of that?
We did, yeah. We moved, most of our meetings are one-to-one, but we also, in our space, in travel, you've got a lot of hotel brands and destinations where you might, as a brand, want to meet a set of buyers and give an opportunity for the brand to tell their story. So we've got a format that we introduce where brands can hold one-to-many meetings. So there are a number of buyers who then come and are part of that. That's great if you, depending on your numbers at the event, but if you've got a tight balance of the numbers of buyers and sellers, then once you start breaking that one-to-one bond, then some other sellers are going to be missing out on meetings. So either bring too many buyers, or again do it at times that are outside of the normal program.
Yeah, it was very interesting though. Like I think that there is a real kind of spread of different meeting experiences. Like for example, we work with a very big insurance technology event, 10,000 people that go there, like in Vegas. It's a great event. And then they also have a event that they've started in Asia. And you think, well, let's just do exactly the same thing, right? Like let's schedule 15,000 meetings at that event as well and scale it over a period of 5 years. Let's do that. But then when you start talking to the people in that industry in Asia, you realize that they're at a different stage in the buying cycle. So they're not ready yet to commit to a startup or a tech company or any other kind of service to bring that into the big insurance company. What they need is an ability to simply interact with other insurance companies, and really it's more like about learning and peer-to-peer like information and so forth. So it's a different stage in the buying cycle, and therefore there, as opposed to focusing on one-to-one meetings, they're first focusing on that peer-to-peer learning, kind of group sessions, roundtables, and those type of things. So like I think you have to kind of, even if something works at one event, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can easily translate it to the next one. Curious about how do you look at, you do a lot of different sizes of events now, and how does the experience change depending on whether it's a 200-person event to a 10, 20,000 person one?
I think for me it's the curation. So actually, I kind of draw back to after the financial crisis of 2008, 2010, there was a real, we cut our event program nearly 40%. And when we started to return the events, we actually changed because it no longer came, people always say, why do people go to events? It'd be 50% content, 50% networking. And after that time, it became actually experience. So you needed to invest more in experience, the look and feel of an event. So that's really where we started to build festivals within Informa. So we created London Tech Week, Africa Tech Festival. We started adding music to our events. We actually took a sort of cue from the vendor shows that were happening at the time, like Dreamforce and the others, where they had totally different budgets to ours in the commercial world. But there were certain nuances that we really felt had to happen. I think post-pandemic, and I still think it's alive today, is that everybody has all come back to physical events, hurrah, but actually the curation bit now. So I still think it's content, networking, experience, but it's really the curation that is going to make that event sticky. And so, yes, we do events at very different formats, but I would say every single one, we are utilizing the data far more about how to really curate the content to certain pieces and who should meet each other and what people need to get out of it. Because there is now a plethora of events again, and we're back in a sort of world of needing to stand out and needing to show the return. So yeah, that would be my view.
Anything to add to that?
No, I think that's
that's all good.
Good. I've just
yeah,
seen
I moved over a bit because
I
was like, oh my God, there's so many questions here. It's very exciting. First one, 4 upvotes. Let's assume that the business doesn't have the resources to have a dedicated VIP team. Love that, by the way. I do too. What actual strategy have you used to ensure a robust conversion from registration to actually turning up to a one-to-one meeting? We have more success at the moment with premium roundtable lunches over one-to-one meetings. Is there more room for maneuver? Carolyn, you want to take that?
So look, technology platforms. There's one thing the pandemic gave us. It was a new plethora of technology platforms that really upped their game. Event apps were pretty mediocre and I think we now have a ton of technology and a ton of plethora that people actually need to start to adopt and use for the physical use points. So I would say I wouldn't say you need to have that team of 15, 20 VIP managers anymore, because frankly, nearly 40% of it could be automated with event tech apps now, like Grip. But I still think it's probably just the piece of curation on site, which frankly your content or your sales teams could also deploy. It's more about what they're doing on site and what that ROI is on the return. What was the second part of the question? Premium lunches, definitely. I mean, one of the key things we do at Founders Forum is we don't just let them have lunch. We've invested in giving tables back into the lunch area now. It's not about packing them in. And we just do topic tables. And it's very relaxed, it's very informal, but again, it just allows people that have a natural interest in one area to meet each other, to break the ice, to get the informality. Those have worked super well and can just be as high a sort of return generating as those individual one-to-one meetings.
Yeah, and that's actually the kind of premium lunches and having topic-based lunches. I was going to mention it earlier at Founders Forum is like truly incredible. Like you'll see I don't know, I saw like Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snapchat. He was looking for which table he was going to sit at. So you saw this guy like that walking around and looking at all those different places. It's an incredible audience, and it's really fun to see because you'll see, I don't know, on the sustainability table was the CEO of Formula E and like some incredible, like somebody from a big oil and gas company. There was like some really interesting people that were chatting to each other.
We're all like sheep at the end of the day. When we enter an event mode, we all would like a little bit of curation, show them where to go and what to do.
Yeah, it really worked well.
Listen, it's the same point that we're making repeatedly. The one-to-one, the pre-scheduled meetings work as long as you know who's going to turn up. Otherwise, doing it on roundtable lunches that are less structured is great, and fitting things in which are the more serendipitous kind of connections throughout the event are really important. People value that highly too. It's just about if you're going to focus on those pre-scheduled meetings, you've got to know who's turning up, or they don't work.
And actually, just one other point: it's not only perhaps your event app, but connecting that to your registration system. So we typically at Informa did not invest in live registration to know who was there on site until post-pandemic. That extra investment of a few £1,000s and a really robust live registration tracking will save you an individual 1 or 2 heads. So that 4 or 5K upfront investment saves you a £35,000 head. So it is certain trade-offs like that where I think now the profit margins are getting a lot more squeezed for events, but certain investments in the tech plays, which have got a lot more sophisticated, I think are very much worth it.
Just seeing the point about what actual strategies have you used to ensure the good conversion from registration to actually turning up. For us, that's about hosted buyer programs. So we are running our events mainly overseas, and so we're taking buyers, we're booking them onto flights, and so we've got a pretty well controlled attendance that way. So it's about the hosted buyer program for us is their commitment to coming and their commitment to the deal.
I think where we've seen some success recently in conversions, actually starting to use WhatsApp communities. Email is really starting to die off as a mechanism, and there's only so many emails you want to receive about the event, but actually building WhatsApp communities and triggering certain messages that are more personal. Actually, if you have someone hosting your hosted buyer meeting, let them be the face of that and personalize it and introduce the person that's actually organizing and hosting it, put faces back into the event's organizers. And so we've had success with that, and also a little bit of the use of LinkedIn as well.
I think that when you're thinking about kind of hosting your buyers, there's really 2 sides of the spectrum that I think is worth thinking about. You're either in a situation where your buyers are cash poor but time rich, which is like, a travel planner might not have a big personal budget to commit to flying to an event and being part of it, and so, but they do have the time for it. So they're very happy to, kind of take the time of their schedule. They make a mini holiday out of it. They have their pina colada in the afternoon. That sounds lovely, and that's why you do it in beautiful locations, right? You've got the other side of the spectrum as well, which is very important to think about. So if you've got like a big financial services event like Money 2020 or London Tech Week, of these type of shows, you're really shooting for the VPs, the C-level, the C-suite, or kind of one below that. And those people, they're actually cash rich but time poor. They've got, they can expense anything. Like, you're not going to impress them if you are able to buy them their hotel room necessarily, because they might not even be allowed to take that, because it might be seen as something that they can't do as a big company. So as a result, what you can do instead is focus on that time point. You say, I'm going to able to get you more and better conversations in a shorter period of time than you will ever be able to get anywhere else. And I can get you a set of meetings that you won't be able to get unless you come to the event. So it's like thinking about where your buyers sit on that spectrum is very important. Otherwise, you might have a value prop that doesn't really necessarily align with the type of buyers that you're looking to attract. There is here another question about which event feature, metric, benefit has been the most useful for attracting sponsors?
Purchasing time frame. That's in order to choose who they want to meet. I would say mostly that, but also being really robust about who they are and where they're at, and the influencer. Are they the actual buyer budget holder, or are they the influencer? So it depends on how many questions you want to put into your registration system. And I would imagine a business like Richard's, where people genuinely want to meet, the more information like that you can collect along the lines of how many levels of up has this got to do on purchasing, when am I buying, what am I buying, how many products, etc., which I know in our pharmaceutical industry at Informa, we could be really, really robust about that because the whole event was set up like that. We probably, in tech world, wouldn't get as many questions through. So then it sort of comes back to actually just the company and the data that actually we can now scrape using Gen AI about the individuals and about their companies, which we do. We scrape all our data and look at Gen AI about their valuations. Have they just fundraised? Have they done all that? We do all that on the back end without them knowing, which gives us a lot more information. And those tools now, I think, are just game changers for event organizers.
This is great. Thank you for bringing that up here. That's so much easier. What are the best meeting apps you've used? Who wants to take that one? I mean...
what's the name of one again? I can't possibly remember. Is it Handshake or something? Was it called? Is it Hold On Tight?
So the name Grip actually came from... The name Grip comes from the grip of a handshake. So it actually does come from that.
Yeah, Grip. Listen, we've worked. We came together with you a number of years ago. We originally, I'm not sure what's the story. We originally built our own tech years ago because we were focusing on these pre-scheduled meetings before other events were doing it, and so the event apps that were coming out that were more about agendas weren't suiting us. So we developed our own system, which then we came together and merged that with what you were doing on the AI side to form the basis of the pre-scheduled tool that you've got. So we're very close with Grip, and we chose to work with them because they were the best in class product that we could see, and paid us the most amount of money for the tech.
Right, so I think that actually, I think the most interesting kind of thing on this is that a lot of the original one-to-one businesses that were started kind of between the year 2000 and 2010, there's like a couple of hundred of them, I'd say, almost all of them built their own tech. And so, because there wasn't any kind of available tech, or you saw kind of people like Informa that kind of started doing it just, in Excel. And so I think that now what you're seeing, there's a couple of companies here, like you've got like Delegate Select, you've got us, there's like, a bunch of others that do this kind of product for organizers now, which didn't really exist before that. And so, yeah, I think it's now starting to be a bigger part of it. I think the challenge is, and if you aren't doing those type of programs yet, the nice thing is that you can introduce it to the events without kind of creating the business model first and then kind of having to kind of shoehorn it into a piece of tech. So you can actually kind of co-design it a little bit, which kind of makes it work in a much better way from day one. And that's kind of what we're seeing now with like people that have done it for 10 years. They might be like, no, we do it in this quite convoluted way. We don't want to change it because, well, that's how we've been doing it all the time. Well, my questions are...
Well, go ahead. I mean, obviously, I'm a board member, so I can't be biased for Grip, but we do work with Sequoia. It's the largest venture capital firm in North America. They've just done recently a very, very robust survey of 50 apps for their Basecamp event. And Grip did come in one of the top 3, and that's their validation.
What were the other two?
Not mine. Well, my point is actually on the other two, and this is definitely one of my main learnings from COVID. We used Hopin, we used SwapGuard. Nothing against those technologies, although obviously Hopin's off now, is the data. Data is your primary valuation as an event organizer, and what I think too many event organizers fail to realize, or realize too late, is that actually a lot of these providers are taking your data and they're utilizing them and they're owning them for larger platforms. And Grip doesn't do that. And so I would just say that is always something to watch out when you're thinking about your suppliers, because data is the new oil is a phrase that's not new, but it is mission critical to your valuation as an event organizer and as an owner, and you must be careful with that ownership of it.
There's here a question actually, Richard, and I think I think it's good to be open about this. Like, how do you rate AI meeting recommendations on event apps, and do you hope human meeting concierge always deliver a much higher value?
Listen, it's both, and when we go through, the process that we go through, our events are fairly small. Once you start going up into bigger events, I think that the AI really starts to come into its own in terms of making the recommendations on the matches that you want to meet with. Our events are for hundreds, not thousands of people, and so for them to navigate through the choice, we still have great ways. It starts them off, a bit like it would with Netflix and what you're going to watch. You're going to have things that start you off and give you suggestions about other stuff, but you'll navigate and find your way to get in there and find them. So I think it's really important that the tech generally is vital. The way that for us, the way that delegates go in, that the quality of the 60,000 meetings we'll do a year, and the quality of those meetings is based on how much time the delegates have put in advance into selecting the right preferences. So getting them to select the right preferences is absolutely vital. I think the AI side, the matchmaking suggestions complements that, but it's really important that they do their preferences and that our team are then picking up and helping those who aren't doing it very well and guiding them through doing it better.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, you know, there is like, what's AI, right? Like we had a session at one here earlier that was very kind of clear about all the different layers of AI that we have now. Like you got the deep neural nets, the kind of predictive stuff, you got the generative AI stuff that's really kind of hot now, and that I think becomes very valuable even for small events in terms of meeting briefing documents and all sorts of other stuff that you could potentially create. I think it also really depends on the quality of your audience, right? Like Founders Forum is like 600-700 people, but you know, when you've got we look at this in terms of the data, you see that you're typically interested about 60% of people. So if we give you a recommendation, there's a 60% likelihood that you're going to be interested in that person. We know from our data that actually it's a random person at Founders Forum, it's about 45%. So it's very, very high. So almost half the people that you would randomly bump into, you're going to have a good conversation. So it's not only about the size, but it's also about the quality of the audience. Because if the average interest rate, let's say for a 600-person event is only 10%, right? Let's say there's only 60 relevant people for you, then the efficacy impact that actually using something that recommends the right people could be much more impactful. So it's a combination of size and quality that really starting to make a difference. Of course, the opposite is also true. Like we've got big events where sometimes it happens that an organizer says, well, the matchmaking isn't working, and we look at the data, it's like, well, you know, your exhibitors are interested in buyers with these specifications, right? There is no one there that has these things. So no amount of matchmaking is going to solve this problem. And so that's kind of the other side of the spectrum. Going to another question here. How much is a meeting worth to an event organizer? I think you already kind of partly gave an answer to that. Richard, how do you look at what the meeting is worth?
We look at that specifically. So, you know, our business is the number of meetings that we put on a year, multiplied by the value that we get for each meeting, and the profit is the price of that meeting minus the cost. So it's exactly that, and you know, the meetings. Well, maybe it's a bit of a trade secret on that, but that's exactly what I'd be monitoring, yeah.
I think one thing that is quite interesting, if you ever go to the M&I Forum website, I don't know if it's still there, but it used to be this calculator. So you could put in, as a potential supplier, how many meetings you would want. You want 20, you want 1 table or 2 tables or 4 tables. And then it would actually calculate it back to the cost per meeting, right? And so, you know, if you give that to your marketing team, for example, it becomes really, really interesting. It's like, hey, actually, we should exhibit, or we should, you know, go here.
Yeah, good point. So it's not that much for trade secrets on the website. So it would be about £200 a meeting. Save you the research, just in case we took it down.
I didn't want to mention it, so I was like, well, I'll just point them at the calculator that is on your website.
It's a great point. Yeah.
We actually have on our website, there's like a revenue calculator as well. So you can put in like how many buyers, suppliers in the industry you're in, and we took some data for like the cost per lead of a particular industry, and it actually gives you a approximation of what a meeting might be worth within that particular industry. And I think that's actually quite interesting, right? Like I was talking to a big organizer recently, and they said, the CEO there said to me, actually what I want to do is I want to be able to know for every one of my 250 events how it compares, the number of leads generated there and the meetings that are happening there against other channels. So that's what we want. If an exhibitor's got 200, that's what they want to know.
I think one of the other interesting things that we've kind of played with, but not really done it, but it's sort of on our to-do list, is whether we start to sell meetings at different prices to the suppliers based on our perceived value of the buyer that they bring, and that's certainly going to be a next level and possibility that we've got. It can be a bit divisive, that sort of thing, but I think it's certainly an opportunity.
Yeah. I think there is a question here, a lot of discussion about one-to-one meetings, but what about the one-to-many or even many-to-many meetings? So I mean, first of all, I don't know, like the interpretation of that, right? So like one-to-one, well, a one-to-one meeting, one-to-many, which is kind of the roundtable group discussion element of it, many-to-many within this context. I'm always thinking more kind of speed networking kind of stuff, but I'm not necessarily sure what many-to-many, what's the difference between many-to-many and one-to-one? I don't know if the person that wrote that want to clarify it. But
I would say maybe we covered it in the speed networking, but
yeah,
also
that's
in
what it is for me.
Also in the lunch tables. We actually have now started to do more unconference. So the reality is no one wants to sit through PowerPoint trauma anymore. We've all learned how to look at Zoom and get all of that sort of content and able to catch content like that. So I mean, our events are zero PowerPoint whatsoever, but we do as many unconference sessions as conference sessions, and that's really about doing roundtables and curated roundtables and setting out sort of 8 topics. People can, sometimes we ask people to choose pre-event, sometimes we just see how it goes on the day. Time again, we're told that's the most valuable thing. It's just people getting into intimate formats where they can actually network with each other and get to know each other in fairly sort of safe, open environment. Those, I think, are now, again, it comes back to my point about the curation and the curation of content, or even the curation of how you set even an exhibition. How do you do that to keep people there all day? And those are now, I think, critical components of the events of the future. It's also, I do a lot about thinking about what does the next gen want out of events and what are they thinking about, because there are audiences of the future. And it is components like this. They're not getting it at work. They need to get it at events. It is the learning and the networking. So that would be my response.
Sorry, I made a joke and I can't remember what my point was going to be now.
Got to share a joke then.
I said they want counselling. We were talking earlier about how the new generation
Next gen employees.
Look, it's very important getting some good counselling every now and then. I can attest to that. So if you lost your point, like I'll take over that. But like I think that that there are so many kind of interesting formats that you can think through now, and actually the on-conference pointers, WPP Stream, so the big advertising agency, they do an incredible on-conference called Stream, and what they do is the beginning of the day there is a big whiteboard, and it has maybe 10 rooms on it, and 10 slots for the entire day, and people can just write down which topic they're interested in, and then people can just simply put a little sticker on where they're going to go, so you can get a kind of rough idea of which ones are busy and which ones aren't. And that's the entire event. That's the whole experience. And I think that baking in that more unconference thing is very interesting because of the difficulty in creating timely content. If you're starting to create your content program 6 months, 12 months in advance, and there is new topics every single week, you might not know what is relevant. And so actually being able to just say, actually, I'm going to reserve this slot to just see whatever is relevant for people on the day, and being able to kind of showcase that then is extremely powerful.
Yeah, it's also really cheap. You've got a lot of user generated discussion groups there, and if you've got a group who and that's working and they're moving on and they're doing that, fantastic. I mean, you've got some low cost content in there, which is fabulous.
No need for expensive speakers that you have to pay,
I think the other interesting feature I've just started to see also is, I think it just comes back to this value point. So meetings are starting to just drive more value. People are having to prove, why do they need to fly? Why do they need to pay for the ticket for the event? What's the value they're getting out of it? And it's genuinely meetings because, as we said, the content you can just get online now, frankly. The new tools I think we're using, the technology is actually capturing audio, which is far cheaper than video, and using Gen AI to produce content and outputs of the event, which we're then placing on our event apps as tools, and again, to sort of prove ROI. I think these sort of formats are things that now, as we think about events in the next generation, are really important sticky tools that we can use technology and AI for, and as much as then more curation around who the audience is. That would just be my other takeaway.
Cool. So last question, I think, I mean, it's again about the kind of software tech side of it. You know, I think some of the tools were mentioned. There's a couple of them out here. You can filter from on the event app. I think those are like probably the main ones that exist. So yeah, if you want to know other tools, like I don't know if you have any other tools that or software that you want to mention besides, of course, Grip, because you know, moved on from that now.
No, just pitch Grip.
We just use Grip.
Well, that was easy. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. A huge round of applause for our panelists and Tim. Thank you so much. That's a wrap today on the main stage of day one at Event Tech Live. Thank you for joining us. It's been a privilege to hope be with you today. Thank you to Pigeonhole for running the Q&A and to Interpretify for the live transcription. Also, thank you to our headline sponsors, Choose to Rent, and to firstsight.media for entertainment, silent seminars, and Novum Live. All of those exhibitors and Grip are on the show floor. Go and see the teams, meet them, find out more about their technology. They'd love to meet with you. Thank you, and we'll see you again tomorrow.